All right, hello and welcome everyone to the Devstream breakdown for the home Devstream number 6. So today we have a really strange Devstream. We have some information and some refreshes on things that we already kind of knew were coming, and also a lot of talk about the Helminth system. That will be a very interesting discussion, I think. So starting us off, we're going to go over kind of just the general things that we saw and heard this stream. The first of which being that we know we are getting 2 upcoming melee stances. We're going to be getting a Warframe stance and a 2-handed katana stance. So hopefully that'll be, a new 2-handed katana stance that's any good, because the old one has been nerfed into the ground, making those weapons way worse than they would otherwise be. So that's nice. And then Warfans, their stance as it stands right now is pretty good, but they only have the one, so they definitely deserve to get another. Besides that, also not on my list of notes here, we have the new Gara Deluxe. So we have 2 images of this. We have this one here, and then we also have this one. And I'm just going to be fully and completely honest. Hitting the light the correct way, as you can see in this image, the glass does look cool. However, that is going to be a very rare scenario, I think, for this skin to look good. I very much dislike the colors on this skin, and I just don't really like anything about this deluxe skin. I would love for it to surprise me whenever it actually gets in game, but I think it looks really bad. And they showed it off in game with the glass off while you're in your 2, and honestly, it looks even worse without the glass on it. Which is how you're going to look as Gara the vast majority of the time. So that was hugely disappointing. But moving on from the Gara stuff, Glassmaker things. So part 5 of the Glassmaker is coming later this year, but hopefully soon. I would hope that later this year would be like a very soon later this year, and not like a November, December later this year. Because otherwise, that'll be a really long night wave, won't it? If that's in, December. So that'd be bad. And also, it is still coming with the sword that we saw at TennoCon. So that sword is going to be a thing. It'll have a somewhat special mechanic to it, where, you can air attack, and you'll glass enemies, and then it has a slam attack, which will shatter the enemies. That being said, it's a big 2-handed greatsword. And it looks really cool, but 2-handed greatswords took a huge hit when all of their stances got nerfed whenever they reworked melee. So it's hard to be particularly excited for this one. But it looks neat, and it'll at least be 3000 mastery, and it's a thing to do with Glassmaker before it finally ends. So, now that we've got that stuff out of the way, Necromechs / Deimos stuff. There is a second mech coming. It is kind of like an exalted melee mech. It has the ability to pick up enemies and throw them around. That stuff seemed cool. I really like the look of this new mech, but I feel like it's going to be very difficult based on what we saw for this mech to come anywhere near the good mech that we have to start with, because the first mech has a solid defensive ability and a very high damage 4th ability, and I feel like that stuff is going to be hard to compete with unless they really jack up the damage of the big exalted blade this thing gets, or increase its range massively, or both. And then in addition to that, they are apparently going to be doing more with the vaults. We don't really know what form that's going to take, but it seemed like they kind of want to do an expansion on the vaults, and make them larger or some such thing. Hopefully this would entail, lowering the timers or making the vault missions more interesting, so that most of that mission is not made up of literally just waiting around. But we'll see how that goes. And now we get to talk about Helminth stuff. So there's a lot of stats here. First of all, we are going to be talking about the most subsumed skills, which you can see here. So, most subsumed, this is basically what people have put into the Helminth system the most. Very unsurprisingly, the number 1 is Rhino. Rhino, of course, highly accessible, and gives Roar, which is, I think, by far the best ability that you can give in the Helminth system. So combined with being really easy to access and the very recent rework of the boss you get Rhino from, everybody had a Rhino set laying around. Followed by Oberon, which makes sense. That ability is good and adds a lot of damage. It's one of the things where if you can spare the augment slot, you can add this damage ability on top of Warframes that already have a damage ability, like Chroma and stuff, and also Rhino. So that's very good. Valkyrie is to be expected. A lot of people were very excited for Warcry. Ash's Shuriken for armor stripping. Mag's Pull for farming. This is mostly for like the Limbo breaking boxes build, and then also the Zaku one that I've shown off on the channel. A lot of these choices make a lot of sense. Ember's way more popular than I thought, but also an easy to get Warframe, so that might be affecting this a little bit. But yeah, this is basically so you can see like who's donated what, and if we go to the very end of the list, you'll be very, very unsurprised to see that Zaku is the least here because people are farming their Zaku to actually just have for themselves, and it's unlikely they would then immediately go and farm a second one. Probably a thing most people would do later. And then, of course, Grendel, who has like one of the least fun farms in the game, coming up on behind, even if Grendel's ability is like pretty good to give out to other Warframes. Really interesting to see this chart because it's like a combination of who has abilities that are useful and which Warframes are trivially easy to get. Like, for example, down here, like rounding out like the last third of the pack, we have Zephyr, who is one of the simplest Warframes in the entire game to get, but it's for whatever reason just barely above Korra, which is a much, much, much more difficult Warframe to acquire. And then you have, where is it at here? We have Nidus up here in like the top third, where Nidus is a much, much more difficult Warframe to farm, but is actually giving a very good and relevant ability, even though that ability got nerfed for the purposes of subsuming. So that's very interesting to see. Super interesting stats to look at, and will, inform decisions people will make. A really interesting note that they made while looking at these is like whether or not they should show the stats in game for people, like on what other players are doing with subsuming and infusing and replacing, which we're going to be talking about here. And it seemed like there was this weird sentiment where like that would just tell players what to do. And the interesting thing about that is that that's not what that does. It just gives players the ability to make a more informed decision and then possibly like form their own opinion based on what others have done. Like, if Rhino is by far the most used thing, then that would inform a player who doesn't know why that there must be some reason it's the most used thing, and that they would then go inquire and learn, as opposed to that just being their default decision and them gaining all the knowledge just through osmosis of other people having done that. So that seemed like a really weird thing. But there were a number of really weird things that the devs talked about today. Moving on, we're going to be talking about the most infused abilities, which a lot of these have like code names on them. So we have all the Helminth abilities here, and I'm actually going to make this a little bit larger for us. We have all the Helminth abilities here, with the top one being Empower. Empower being the most infused makes a lot of sense. Empower is a very, very strong ability, and it's one of the very, very first things you get. Many people will probably be very surprised to see Helminth Companion be here, but this doesn't surprise me at all, because for the purposes of farming the Helminth, you would infuse and uninfuse this over and over and over and over and over in order to like fast rank up your Helminth to get access to the higher abilities. So it's actually not surprising at all that Companion is an ability that is like essentially like quality of life, like barely useful at all, but it would be infused this much just due to it being the one that you would grind on just to efficiently level the Helminth if you wanted access to the other Helminth abilities. That makes sense. And then Helminth Efficiency. This one is the efficiency skill for ammo. So this is just like your 75% ammo efficiency one. This one's also one that's like very cheap to infuse, and it's early on, so it makes sense that a lot of people would be experimenting with this. Helminth Speed, this is the one that makes you faster. This one recently just got fixed, so I'm actually going to have to look at it again, but it was infused quite a bit because people have very easy access to it. Obviously, with a lot of these Helminth abilities being on the top, it's just that way more people have access to them, kind of no matter what they're infusing or how they're leveling the Helminth. You'll just automatically get these, so they're trending higher than others. And then we have Rhino's Roar at the top. Obviously, most subsumed Warframe, way more opportunity for more people to be using that ability. Also, ability is extremely good, even in its nerf state. It's way better than a lot of things the Helminth system has to offer. So very obvious that this would be here. And then, like you have like the other Helminth abilities and stuff. And like the thing that's really interesting here is that we have at number 8 Helminth Stun, and this is marked for death. Helminth Stun is what marked for death is. And this ability just got catastrophically nerfed, as we saw, right? And we're going to talk a bit more about it being catastrophically nerfed and other stuff going on with that a lot during this video. But it's not like this ability was being used that much in order to deserve a nerf, right? Like, obviously, we have all of these other stats to show that these other abilities are being used way more. So it wasn't that this ability was being overused. Clearly, there must be some other reason for them to have catastrophically nerfed Mark for Death. Because, like, even Roar, in its already nerfed form, was being used more than this ability. So it's definitely not that it was, like, overused or the only thing people were using or something, which makes it even more confusing why they bothered to nerf it. But it's only going to get more confusing from here. But yeah, and then, like, the least infused stuff is what you would be able to guess. It'd be, like, the least infused Warframes and stuff. And, like, the bottom part of this generally trends towards, like, the Warframes that didn't get subsumed very much, and the top part of this is the more interesting bit. But a very interesting part of this is what is actually getting replaced the most per Warframe, and then what is getting replaced the most overall here. So we have Mesa's 1 being the number one thing to get replaced in the entire system, which makes a lot of sense. Mesa's a popular Warframe, and her 1 is literally not an ability. So it's the very obvious choice to replace. Necros, very similarly. Necros is, like, 1. Nobody uses Necros as 1. No one's doing the gimmick with, like, his revive thing or whatever, so replacing that is very easy. No one likes an ROS as 3. Chroma's 1 is literally a downside instead of an upside for an ability. Volt's 1 I was a little surprised to see here, but I guess it kind of depends on what build you're going for. I could see people doing this on, like, the ESO Volt and stuff. And then Rhino's 1, I think this is mostly Empower causing this, because you replace Rhino's 1 with Empower whenever you're going for, like, the huge buffer Rhino to get that extra 50% strength. Excalibur's 3 makes sense because it's kind of just a non-starter as an ability. Ivara is terrible too. So, like, you have lots of, like, really obvious things here for people who have played for a long time, but I think it's a really, really interesting list for people that maybe have not been around as long to just kind of go through here and, like, see what's getting replaced the most. And then, like, obviously, you have a couple ones on here where I think it's actually, yeah, you'll start to see the abilities pop up more and more. But, like, for the popular choices, you'll see like what gets replaced the absolute most up here, and then pretty much all the Warframes that anyone cares about infusing abilities on are represented on the list. But yeah, this is really interesting and will feed directly into a thing that we're going to talk about in a moment. But I want to clarify here that, to me, what this chart would say intrinsically is that the abilities that make up, like, let's say the top 10 here, so it would be like what, up through Volt is top 5, and then up through Ashes 1 is top 10. If these are the top 10 abilities that are replaced the most, that would say to me that those abilities need help to not be such an easy choice for just instantly replacing them and not caring, because that would mean that those Warframes have dud abilities. That's, like, kind of the immediate thing that I think, like, we'd be able to suss out from the data, at least on the high end of a chart like this. For me personally, that's the thing that I get out of this data, and that'll be important in a moment. But before that, let's talk about them reevaluating Mark for Death. So Mark for Death was catastrophically nerfed, and then now they're saying some things which we're going to go over, but it is going to be looked at again next week. That's the really important thing to note here, that it maybe will become a thing that anyone would care about using again next week. Also, buffing bad abilities with a bunch of question marks on it. This was really, really not clear, and it seemed like a hard no that they were going to be buffing bad abilities, when before the Helminth system released, it seemed like a hard yes that bad abilities would be buffed. And by seemed like, I mean that's literally a quote, that they would be buffing poor abilities. But we've seen the buffs to Zephyr's ability and Trinity's ability, and neither of those abilities have moved the needle whatsoever on being more useful. And while they are kind of buffs, because technically the Trinity one was a nerf for the one use case that might have had with Saren, we haven't really seen, like, actual buffs come in that makes the Helminth system more interesting. We've actually pretty much exclusively seen nerfs to make the system less appealing and seem less worth it overall. So pretty much everybody is wondering where those buffs are. With that, though, I have some really, really, really confusing clips from this dev stream that I need to talk about. There are 3 of them, And down here we kind of have the titles of them. Out of Office Balance, Nerf Mesa, Don't Buff Her Useless ability, and Underhead Toss Complete Whiff. So, we're going to go over these in order. The first of them is Out of Office Balance. We're just going to watch this with no commentary, and then I'm going to talk about it. Hopefully you guys enjoy this clip.
And I think it's worth mentioning at this time as well, one of the abilities that the Helminth offers is called Marked for Death. In yesterday's hotfix, we brought it closer to the way the team envisioned it working. But I also did mention on prime time, or home time last night rather, that a lot of the team with balance interest in this ability are on well-deserved vacations. So we do intend on reviewing its current state in more detail next week, just to see about what the next steps are. There's been a lot of
Okay, so that first clip is the Out of Office Balance. So this clip is extremely confusing to me as a player and as someone who reads the patch notes and like pays attention to what's going on with the changes in Warframe. And I might be like understanding this incorrectly, but it seems like there are people on the team that have an interest and influence on the balance of the game that are on vacation, which by all means, of course, employees should go on vacation. People should have time off. 100%. There is no part of me that thinks people shouldn't have vacations or something ridiculous like that. That's stupid. But if those people are out of office or away or like otherwise indisposed doing another thing and cannot influence the balance of things like Marked for Death, would it not then make sense for those important people to come back and then have influence before an update ships? Because this update for Marked for Death that nerfed it into the fucking dirt just came out. So ostensibly, these people have been out of office and not able to influence these decisions, but if they're the people that are like helping to influence the balance of the game and make the game better overall and have like an important say in how these things are changed, then wouldn't it make sense to wait for them before just pushing the update and having it be kind of a shit show? Like, to me, that's really, really weird to have those two things coincide. To have, like, this update go out, but then the people that would help with this not be there. Like, it seems like those two things don't go together ever. And, like, if it's just, like, the people in charge of this stuff aren't here, so we're going to give it off to people who aren't usually in charge of this stuff, that seems like that's what leads to, like, the really incohesive balance that we have in Warframe on the whole. And having a more cohesive team of people in charge of the balance make things more consistent across the whole of the game, as opposed to nerfing Marked for Death, would be better. Because nerfing Marked for Death, I'm going to be entirely honest with you guys, a lot of people thought that ability was OP, but it was like barely okay, and like made Ashe more of a Warframe anyone would care about. If anything, it was bringing Ashe and Exgal and maybe even like Wukong up a bit into more playability with other Warframes we've recently been using. So if anything, it was helping the balance of the game for it to be in the state that it was in. So it's very confusing to me, the whole thing with that situation. But it does not stop there. So next we have Nerf Mesa, but don't buff her useless ability, which is this.
It hurts a bit. It hurts a bit.
But no, it is, well, maybe it hurts. Or
what's it replaced with?
Well, that's the thing. I can tell you that in a different stat breakdown, not on this stream, but it does get replaced. I believe it gets replaced mostly with the Strength Helminth ability or any other subsumed ability. But Mesa's one.
Anything but that.
Anything but that. So Mesa's one is the first most replaced. Then Necros' one. Then,
all right. Well, time to take Mesa out of the game.
Well, you have to acknowledge that that means she's the most popular. In some regards, it's just that one ability that people wanted replaced, so.
Okay, so this one, I have to start off with, I would love to give the benefit of the doubt here that the comments about this were being played for comedy. But I do want to stress that this is about this chart, where we can see Mesa's 1 being the most replaced ability, right? So Mesa's 1 is a terrible ability that has never added anything to Mesa. So it makes perfect sense that this would be on a very popular Warframe like Mesa, because she is very good and has a lot of advantages, that her 1, which is trash, would be replaced extremely often. That stuff makes sense. And then, like, comments about, like, nerfing or, like, removing Mesa as, like, a really good Warframe seem like kind of in poor taste, right? Like this is like, I mean, it's, you know, comedy is subjective, of course, and I hope this was funny for some people, but to me, it seems like a really weird take whenever people are like currently very unhappy that Marked for Death just got like trash canned and are afraid that all the other things that they like are about to be trash canned. So that seems a little rough to me. Obviously, this is not like, I'm not like hating on Scott here, but I think like if it was supposed to be comedy, it could have been a little bit more clear that that was the case. And if it's not supposed to be comedy, I feel like the data being shown here is not being like processed correctly as like this is the thing people replace, so therefore Mesa's one is actually a very, very bad ability that no one bothers to use, as opposed to Mesa being OP here. I don't think those two things like correlate in any way with her one being replaced and her being like too strong or something. But that wouldn't probably be my take without this last one. This last clip is almost hard to watch because we usually call this a softball question. This is a complete underhand toss, slow motion, complete and absolute whiff of DE in general, because this seems like a thing that should have or has been or hopefully was talked about at some point with the entirety of the Helminth system and was a hope of much of the community, but seems to have been like basically completely dashed with this interaction here.
I think, you know, we're not going to set a hard and fast rule at any point in time about like our philosophy will always be to do it this way, but because Helminth is its own thing, would the information gleaned from its usage lead to like buffing the abilities that always get replaced, or for now are we just like Helminth is its own entity and its information is relative to the dynamics of the system?
It's currently the Wild West.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It's new, and we'll do as we do.
Yep. Good luck, Pablo.
Well, we'll be fine.
It's fine.
Yeah, buff useless abilities. But see, if every ability becomes useful, then Helminth, what do you do, right? What do you do? I'm joking. There's things.
Sounds like a syndrome speech.
I
from The
know.
Incredibles.
I know. It is a syndrome speech.
It is, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so that is like, I feel like that should be the easiest question to answer in the entire universe of Warframe at current time. I feel like it is like a foregone conclusion that these abilities are very clearly in a place where like you can look at these and go over these and like take the data in. Like DE has been so adamant about taking in what gets used the most as data up until recently with Marked for Death, I guess. They've been so adamant about taking in that data and nerfing things like immediately. Like instant response, Zorus is gone, for example. And like just like taking the Bakuva Brahma, that got used a lot, goodbye. The Catch Moon, that got used a lot, goodbye. So now this data comes to us and is like, these abilities are bad, and we replace them very often and very easily, and it's not really a choice to be made, right? Like Mesa's one, there's no contest. Mesa's one is absolute garbage. It's trash. There's no use case for it in the entire game, so we replace it. And like the same for Necros's one, the same for like Inaros's 3. Chroma's 1 is, you know, like I said, more of a downside than a positive, and we have all these abilities that literally don't do anything that we're replacing, and the data shows that, but the answer to that question not being met with like a very easy, even like a very vague, it will probably influence our decisions to like buff things in the future, like even being vague about it and like trying to provide some hope that the poor parts of different Warframes will be improved eventually. Like these problems that have existed for years, Mesa's one has never been good. And like Necros's one, the same. Like there's a lot of abilities here that have never once been good or effective. So like, it's an insane like underhand toss softball. easiest home run you've ever seen in your life, but it's just somehow this huge Wild West whiff. And it's hugely confusing and concerning for me personally, because like I think we were on kind of a roll with like since like TennoCon and stuff, like right after TennoCon was like a huge hit, and like it was this really cool thing that we saw, and like a couple updates before that where everything was like going great. And then we got into this like weird funk where like the Helminth nerf started happening, and then like now we've got like the Mark for Death stuff and like the resource costs of things and like bile and like all these little issues where like they're going to be reevaluating like bile costs and stuff in the future, but like couldn't bile costs have been reevaluated instead of the people who were who were out of office that were apparently having influence on Mark for Death? Like, couldn't the bile have been evaluated instead of changing Mark for Death, like completely unnecessarily? Like, it just seems like it's very confusing how things are being done, right? Because sometimes, like, whenever it seems like it's convenient to nerf something, it's data driven. Like, this is the most used, clearly this is unhealthy, and like we can't do that. But whenever it's data driven that these things are bad, the bad things never get buffed, is really what it seems like. And it just feels bad, like, honestly. Like, I'm having a lot of fun with the Deimos update, and I like the Helminth system, and it's got some problems, like, with the bile and stuff, and, like, there's, like, a lot of good things there, but, like, this Devstream just felt weird in terms of just, like, just very strange statements going around, and, like, just very strange. I would love to be able to see like more of a positive side of this, but like a lot of the stuff that was talked about seemed just rough in general. Like, I hope like the next upcoming updates with Warframe can like kind of show that it's maybe not this way, and like the way that I'm perceiving this is just wrong. I would love to be wrong about like how I'm looking at these clips and stuff, and that like we're going to be getting buffs to like bad abilities and like doing like the work to make the Helminth system more interesting, as opposed to just nerfing everything anyone would use in it and then just calling it a day and being like, that's a system that's in the game, just like Arcwing, which we use as a glorified taxi. But like, it's hard to be positive about this Devstream, unfortunately. I would really love to be. But yeah, that's the home stream number 6 breakdown. Yeah, I'm gonna be streaming Warframe later tonight, testing out the Zaku changes. Hopefully that goes a lot better than the Devstream did, and I will hopefully see you guys there later, everybody.